I imagine that most people, many people in this room, cannot imagine what the world would be like without the conflict that tears across the political debate at every moment. I had a very powerful example of this in a conversation in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, in which a young conservative activist asked me what I did. And I said that my professional life was mainly devoted to running an organization devoted to promoting girls' education in the most difficult parts of developing country. And he looked at me with a kind of horror and dismissed what I did. And he gave the perfect political Washington answer. He said, well, nobody can be against that. And of course, the implicit message was that if you couldn't be against it, it wasn't worth being for. And I think that the challenge that we have tonight is to try and open up an idiom which focuses entirely on what people disagree about, and to try and imagine what the debate would look like if it focused instead on things that people agree about. And there are an amazing number of things that people agree about. In fact, I would go so far as to say, when you really get down to it, since nothing that we're doing now is working, when you focus on the things that people agree about, you will start to find answers to a whole range of problems, from domestic problems of race relations and gay rights and the whole range of them, to foreign policy and security policy issues. We'll start to find answers to that. I got into this field in an extraordinary time. It was 1968. People in this room may think that we are living through historic conflict. Yet 1968, for anybody here who remembers it, was so much more conflicted than now that it's almost mind-boggling. I was at a dinner in New York sometime in that period, and it had a very wide range of political views at each table. There were a bunch of round tables. And one of the people at my table offered the view that the country was coming apart to such an extent that the only hope for the country was a dictator coming to power. And not a single person at the table disagreed. It wasn't really incredible. It was incredible for me because at that moment, I came and went to work for William Buckley, the most prominent and visible conservative of his generation, and for a very long time afterwards. And I lived in the culture of the National Review, where we were considering all of these problems. And the introduction of the beginnings of a transpartisan view started to make their impact on me when I fell in with a group of black radical intellectuals in New York, people who were advising the famous radicals of the time, H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael. And we had a very intense conversations about things because they wanted to tell me what black radicals really thought beyond what one might have read in the New York Times, let's say. And it became increasingly obvious to me that the vision I was hearing from them sounded much more like the vision of the conservatives at National Review than it did from any left of center person I knew. And so I devoted the year to planning a day-long conference, bringing these two groups together at this incredibly conflicted moment. And the truth was that the two groups had very similar views. And the heart of it, of what they agreed about, was that the challenge of the deprived and the challenge of race and all of these things was really not about equality. It was about empowerment. And that what the only hope for the race issue from their perspective was that they wanted empowerment, and they felt crushed by the desire of the moderate left to bring equality. This is a very complicated subject, and I'm just going to throw it out because I can't get into great detail about it. But that insight has influenced everything I've done since that period, and especially in the current work that I do in the most tribal and traditional parts of developing countries, liberating women and girls, focusing on a strategy of empowering them with results that are quite extraordinary. The political system, I'd like to give you a flavor of what the principal positions taken by people who focus on empowerment. But the more I was with Buckley, the more I discovered that this simple left-to-right spectrum yielded so many anomalies that I could hardly keep up with them. I found many people describing themselves as conservatives, many people describing themselves as liberals, who disagreed, who were supposed to agree, and many people who were liberals and conservatives agreeing where they weren't supposed to agree. And I really embarked on a lifelong quest to try to untangle all these things and try to make sense of it, because everybody gets before the cameras, and all the articles make it seem as if these concepts of left and right all mean something. But the truth is they don't mean very much. And they conceal the idea that they mean coherent things, conceals enormous conflict within the left and within the right. It was especially obvious at the end of the 60s, when the new left and the old left were at absolute war with each other. I mean, to a degree that you just can't, the things they said about each other were unbelievable. And the conflict today on the right, between the libertarian, the freedom right, what I call the freedom right, and the order right, are just incredible. And trying to get ways, whenever you found an issue which brought people together, it was because you found there were four positions, not two, an order position and a freedom position on each side. And whenever people came together and whenever you found a solution, it was because each one of them, the truth in each one of the four became obvious, and people engaged each other to find solutions. In my own experience, the greatest conflict in public life happens when people talk about public issues in terms only of the government, that the government is doing this. If it's public schools, it's about the government and what it should be doing about public schools. Or it's a foreign policy, it's about the government. And never mentioned is the idea that citizens have a role to play in a healthy democracy. And none of the political parties ever talk about this, because it's all about them. Yet, as you go down in the whole range of issues, it's only when citizens really become involved and engage each other that you really get solutions to almost any problem you can name. I found that conflict is greatest when it's all about the government, and it declines substantially when citizens are empowered, and especially when they engage each other. And when they engage each other in common purposes, powerful, magical things can happen. In tribal societies in Rajasthan, in India, fathers who wouldn't let their girls get out of their houses, when they become involved in a school and people really engage each other, these so-called cultural aversion to girls, women and girls, it disappears in 4 or 5 minutes. You can see it. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the way we talk about this, but absolutely, I've seen it. My program is now in 7,000 schools, serving about 800,000 children. The governments like the program so much, they're starting to pay for it. And within 5 years, I think that the government will pay for the entire cost of the programs. And the secret to it is it's an empowerment program that empowers people at every school to become stakeholders, to become active in the school. It's a way of informally charterizing every government school. The opposition to charter schools that's so powerful now is not against the idea of local empowerment. It's against the idea that only some people to get to enjoy it, because the people who oppose it are frightened that they're going to be left behind in the nightmare. When you offer this to everybody and you engage everybody, it completely changes. There is no opposition anywhere in any of the places where we're working in India. I want to just apply this concept to very briefly to a number of issues that will bring the four quadrants together. And when you do that, what you'll notice is that The programs I'm going to describe fall away from and can't be located on the current spectrum. They're not anywhere on it. One of them is, for instance, the program of Hernando de Soto, working out of Lima, Peru, on getting property rights to the poor in developing countries. This has total transpartisan support. It is supported everywhere. It works everywhere. He mobilized an army of 120,000 peasants in the early 90s and put the Sendero Luminoso that had been trying to kill him for years out of business. And there was not a single shot fired. But once they were stakeholders in the country and empowered, they basically kicked the drug dealers and the terrorists out. There is a widespread belief in developing countries. Since this is a foreign policy place, I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy. There's a widespread belief that whenever a community owns a well or owns a school, the community will protect it from terrorists. The obvious answer to sustainability and to empower in these countries, underlying a sustainable foreign and security policy, is to empower people in those countries with ownership. And I'm working on the development of a new organization right now to make that case, because we have no strategy at the present time. No strategic principle that defines what we should be doing over there. So we're just randomly responding to things. And why would anybody expect that the state of current policy would be in chaos under those circumstances? A crucial part of empowering citizens requires a very important role for civil society. Civil society today has no role in the current debate because it's all about the government and all about people there. And the government does very important things. But I am right now writing a book with a very celebrated educator in the San Francisco Unified School District on government school reform, comparing our work in India with his in San Francisco. And it is clear that for many areas of policy, civil society organizations need to be involved in powerful ways to help facilitate and give training to people in local communities so they can really become empowered and take control of their own lives. I want to say something very briefly about Educate Girls Globally, my organization. We started in the most tribal and traditional communities in India, and by principles that have been used successfully in the most difficult Islamic radical places of Upper Egypt and Northwest Pakistan. And the effect of empowering women and girls by giving people ownership of the schools, bringing everybody together, including government officials, all difference between public and private disappears when you do this. People become people. They reach out to each other in common purpose. They become engaged. And all the things that torment our political debate disappear. I appreciate the chance to share with you some of my experiences over a very long period. I think these principles, transpartisan principles, are the key to a strategy in foreign and security policy and to the whole range of issues that are tormenting our society at the present time. Thank you.